Hello everyone, in today's video we are going to be covering the following learning targets, and we're going to be talking about cellular respiration. In this video we are going to be focusing on aerobic cellular respiration. So in general, what is cellular respiration? Cellular respiration is a process that releases chemical energy in the form of ATP from breaking down sugars and other carbon-based molecules which are found in the food that we eat. So whenever you eat a meal, this meal usually would contain different types of carbon-based molecules. So it could contain carbohydrates, proteins, lipids, etc. When you eat the food, when the body digests it, these carbon-based molecules, specifically or mainly sugars, are going to be broken down and they're going to be used to create another form of energy or a different energy molecule, which is the ATP molecule. So essentially, we are breaking down food, which is known as metabolism, in order to make energy, which is known as respiration. Now, before cellular respiration can even happen, the food, like I said, has to be broken down into smaller molecules. This is because carbon-based molecules are pretty big. Okay, they're often called macromolecules because they are very big molecules. And before your body can even use them, they have to be broken down into smaller molecules. So for example, if we have a huge carbohydrate macromolecule, it can be broken down into its components. So glucose can be broken down to something even simpler. So usually the glucose molecule, which is found in our food, which is a form of carbohydrate, is broken down into something smaller. The whole process that breaks down glucose into something smaller, into a smaller molecule, is known as glycolysis. So this process, glycolysis, has to happen before cellular respiration begins. The word glyco means sugar and lysis means to break down. So glycolysis is literally translated into, or literally means the process by which we are breaking down sugar. So glycolysis takes a glucose molecule and it splits it in half. Glucose, if we take a look at this image right here, is a 6-carbon molecule, which means that it's made from 6 carbons. Like I said, it's a pretty big, chunky molecule. So what happens in glycolysis is the 6-carbon molecule, which is glucose, gets broken down in half or gets split in half into 2 other molecules known as pyruvate. Okay, so pyruvate is a 3-carbon molecule, while glucose is a 6-carbon molecule. If you take glucose and split it in half, you will end up with 2 pyruvate molecules. This whole process of glycolysis is taking place in the cytoplasm. And the special thing about glycolysis is it does not require oxygen to take place. Glycolysis is known as an anaerobic process, okay? The word aerobic, whenever you see the word aerobic by itself, aerobic means requires oxygen to occur, okay? Aerobic exercises, such as walking, or even, when you're like jogging very lightly, anything aerobic means that your body requires high amounts of oxygen to do these types of activities, or it's a process that requires oxygen to take place. If we add the word or the prefix "an" in front of the term aerobic, it means not. So the prefix "an" means not. So anaerobic will then mean not aerobic. In other words, does not require oxygen. Okay, so glycolysis, which is a step that has to happen before cellular respiration can occur, is an anaerobic process, which means that it does not need any oxygen to take place. Okay, so taking glucose, splitting it in half into 2 pyruvate molecules, it's happening in the cytoplasm and it does not require any oxygen to take place. Once that is finished, once the 2 pyruvates are created, then we can move on to the stages of the cellular respiration. Okay, so first phase, like I mentioned, we have the glycolysis taking place. The reactants of glycolysis is 1 glucose molecule, and remember, glucose has 6 carbons in it. And then This is broken down into two pyruvate molecules which act as the products. Now, anytime we have any source of reaction or any source of chemical, process happening, anytime we have a reaction in the body, we need to use energy, of course. Yes? Notice that glycolysis requires two ATPs. In other words, it requires a small amount of energy for it to split glucose into two pyruvate molecules. And at the end of this whole process of glycolysis, in addition to making two pyruvate molecules, four ATPs are released. So you have released four ATPs, but you've used up two. So this is what the 2 ATP gained means. Okay, so you have gained 2 net ATPs. You had to use 2 to make 4, which means that you technically. All right, now you don't really need to worry so much about these tiny details. What you need to know is that glycolysis, the main reactant is glucose, and the main products are 2 pyruvate molecules and ATP, small amounts of ATP. All right, now that we have glycolysis done, we are going to move on to the next part of cellular respiration. We are going to move on to the aerobic part of cellular respiration. The aerobic stage or the aerobic phase of cellular respiration requires oxygen. And like I said, this is because the word aerobic means needs oxygen. Now, aerobic cellular respiration basically is going to produce a high amount of ATP. All right. Now, sometimes an organism is found in an environment where there isn't enough oxygen, or the organism itself, like is a very simple organism, like this tiny bacteria living somewhere obscure. It's not getting enough oxygen. What will happen? Does the organism die? Well, not really. In this scenario, after glycolysis takes place, something known as anaerobic cellular respiration will take place. Remember, anaerobic means no oxygen is required. And the prefix an means not. So aerobic requires oxygen to happen. Anaerobic does not require oxygen to happen. Glycolysis, we already established, is anaerobic. But in certain scenarios, after glycolysis takes place, anaerobic cellular respiration will happen instead of aerobic cellular respiration. Now, for today, we are focusing on aerobic cellular respiration. Okay, so far, glycolysis has taken place. We have broken down glucose into 2 pyruvate molecules, and now we are moving on to aerobic cellular respiration. Okay, so in the scenario where oxygen is present, high amounts of oxygen are present, aerobic cellular respiration will take place, and it makes, by the end of this process, by the end of aerobic cellular respiration, large amounts of ATP are made. So 30 plus, between 36 and 38 ATPs are going to be produced by the end of aerobic cellular respiration. And aerobic cellular respiration specifically takes place in the mitochondria. All right. And if we kind of remember back to the idea of when we were looking at the structures of the different organelles, we noticed that the mitochondria is very highly folded. And the reason why it's highly folded, we already mentioned this, is to increase surface area to allow more reactions to take place. So in this particular case, the mitochondria is highly folded to allow more ATP to be made, to increase surface area for making more ATP. All right, so here's an overview of aerobic cellular respiration. It's happening inside the mitochondria. And don't get so overwhelmed by this image. It might seem like a lot is going on, but we're going to break it down into the 2 stages. Okay, so the first stage is going to be known as the Krebs cycle. This is the first step of aerobic cellular respiration. It's happening inside the mitochondria. And then we have the second stage, or the second step of aerobic cellular respiration, which is known as electron transport phase or electron transport chain. And in this particular part, or this stage follows the Krebs cycle, and it's still happening inside the mitochondria. All right, so to kind of summarize everything, stage 1, like I said, is the Krebs cycle. And during this stage, what happens is the two pyruvates that were previously made during glycolysis enter the Krebs cycle, and these pyruvate molecules are going to be broken down in order to release small amounts of ATP. In addition, carbon dioxide is released as a byproduct. Next, we have the electron transport chain, and here, the energy that was previously made in the Krebs cycle enters the electron transport chain, and some oxygen, which is a reactant of cellular respiration, is used to make water. Water is released as a byproduct. Finally, at the end of the electron transport chain, we end up with large amounts of ATP, like I said, 30 plus or between 34 to 36. So if you take a look at an overall equation of cellular respiration, aerobic cellular respiration, the reactants are going to be glucose, which you remember had to be broken down into the two pyruvates during glycolysis, and then oxygen, which we breathe in. The products of cellular respiration are going to be carbon dioxide, which is released during the first step of the aerobic cellular respiration during Krebs cycle, and it's released into the atmosphere. We breathe it out because it's a toxic gas. Water, this is the second product, which is made during the electron transport chain or the second stage of the aerobic cellular respiration. And finally, large amounts of ATP, 30 plus ATP molecules. Okay, so to put it all together before I end the video today, today we talked about aerobic cellular respiration. But I said that before this even can happen, glycolysis takes place inside the cytoplasm of the cell. In glycolysis, glucose is broken down into two pyruvate molecules. Sometimes you'll notice that it's called pyruvic acid. It's the same thing. Pyruvate and pyruvic acid are the same thing. So after the two pyruvate molecules are made, small amounts of ATP are also made and released. These pyruvate molecules enter the Krebs cycle. The Krebs cycle then basically breaks down the molecules even further. It creates small amounts of ATP, small amounts of ATP, and it releases carbon dioxide, which we breathe out. The small amounts of ATP are moved, or they go to the electron transport chain in order to power it up and help it make even more ATP, specifically 36 to 38 ATP molecules. In order for this to happen, oxygen needs to be used. So the oxygen is going to be used during the process of the electron transport chain, and water is released as a byproduct. And that's about it for today.